Hello, veterans community. It's Matthew Hill from Hill and Ponton, and this is a special outreach to you all. We're under attack. The Washington Post, one of the biggest, oldest, most reputable papers in our country, has decided to spend its very significant resources, its time, and some of its best reporters on reporting on the VA. Unfortunately, the angle they chose is not how the VA system is broken, not how hundreds of thousands of vets go every year with their claims denied. They're focusing on the veterans themselves, and they're asking the question, do they deserve these benefits? These benefits that when you all signed up to represent our country, that were coded into our statute saying, we recognize you're serving. We recognize that with that service, you are going to face dangers, both at home and abroad, both in combat and your day-to-day operations. Because see, being a service member in our military is not like sitting behind a desk. You're not just sitting there typing up a story and dreaming it up. No, our service members are out in the field. They're moving around. They're doing things that are dangerous. They're lifting heavy equipment. They're around explosives. And because of that, they are constantly in danger of getting hurt, which is why Congress gave ample benefits to veterans. It's why it recognized any service member, whether in combat or stationed at a base, is entitled to these benefits. The Washington Post decided to take a very narrow view and look at fraud in the VA and say, is this fraud representative of what's going on in the VA? Is America just giving away money to these veterans? It's really saddened me to see that it's taken all these resources and all their time, over 2 years, they say, to come out with an article that is just overwhelmingly one-sided. They look at the fraud in the VA and they want you to say, oh, these veterans are getting benefits they shouldn't. You have attached my summary of the data that I found to rebut their data. But I just want to run through a couple key things with you. They went through 63 some cases that were investigated by the VA. And what the Inspector General does is look at if there was fraud, when there was fraud, and then they go prosecute. So they found these 60 cases where veterans were prosecuted for falsifying information and fraudulently obtaining benefits. But what the Post fails to do is to give you any reference both internally in the VA and externally with other agencies. Internally in the VA, there are some 900,000 veterans who are denied their benefits every year. So for every one prosecution, it was nearly 13,000 had their claims denied. So for the total of veterans you look at, we've got 6.9 million veterans receiving benefits. And then we have back 63 who the VA found committed fraud. And those veterans were prosecuted for that. So if you look at that, we've got about 0.001% of veterans who committed fraud and were fraudulently obtaining benefits. But I think it's important when you consider agencies, you consider organizations, there's going to be fraud in any organization. But if you look at just the government as a whole, you look at the other big departments, let's look at the DoD. They have an annual budget of over $840 million. They have not been able to account for 63% of their assets. That seems a little fraudulent. Then you look at unemployment care, Medicare, Medicaid. We've got $190 billion worth of unemployment benefits during the COVID era that was fraudulently given to individuals. Medicare, Medicaid, you've got over $60 billion of improper payments and benefits. And then we've got 63 veterans cases here. And so what the Post seems to be doing is just taking this narrative and saying veterans are scalping the government. They're taking Americans' hard-earned money, taxpayer dollars, and they're just capturing that and just getting this free ride. What they seem to be saying is that veterans don't deserve the benefits that Congress gave them. It's not like veterans are going in and making up claims and saying, hey, why don't you give me money for this? No, it's coded in both statute and regulation, all these benefits that veterans are entitled to. And so the Washington Post taking the angle that the VA has an honor system with veterans and that, oh, you just tell us what's wrong and we'll give you benefits. See, if you look at these articles they've written, you don't see many quotes. You don't see many background stories from veterans themselves, veterans who've been through the system and been denied and denied. At Hill and Ponton, we've had the honor of representing thousands and thousands of veterans. Up until a couple years ago, the majority of those veterans were Vietnam era veterans. And we looked back on the decades of their lives, half a century, a lot of them, where they were just denied, told they weren't entitled to anything, told to go away. And then we saw the stories of their lives and just how much their service in Vietnam or during the Vietnam era affected their lives, broke relationships, broke the ability to do jobs. We've seen now this newer generation of Afghani and Iraqi veterans and how they are going through a similar process. Thankfully, both the VA and those veterans themselves understand that they are entitled to these benefits, and that if they are one of the 900,000 that get denied, they can still reapply, they can appeal. And so they're getting more benefits now. But the Post seems to say, if you look at the increase in benefits we've had over the last decade, it's exploded, and it has exploded. But that is not veterans cheating the system. That's a cost of America deciding to go to war. When we go to war, when we deploy our troops internationally, we are committed to those troops coming back home and being taken care of. When I look at the Post investigation here, I don't see journalism. I see advocacy disguised as an investigation. It's almost like they're scapegoating disabled veterans for some kind of political purpose. They're ignoring larger and much more breathtaking fraud problems in other agencies. And it looks like they're providing ammunition for those who want to cut veterans' benefits. This investigation was very disappointing to me. They harp on how thorough and how accurate and how much research they did, yet it was completely one-sided. They failed to present the full context that would allow readers to understand, okay, so here's the fraud, but here's what the system as a whole looks like. The fact that they called it an honor code system, for anyone who's been involved, a veteran or advocate, would understand just how little they understand of the system itself. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on how they specifically called out Louie Baur, as most of us know, Combat Craig. I had the privilege to be a friend of Combat Craig's. We did quite a few videos together, and we would call and talk about ideas. I look back and it kind of makes me smile because whenever he had me on his show, he'd always come at me and get me with a question that stumped me, or he'd just make me laugh because he knew I kind of took myself and I took VA benefits too seriously. One of the things Louie taught me was that this is a serious and important process that our veterans are going through, but you don't have to lose your humanity just because you're going through this bureaucracy that's faceless and slow and just drags on and on. So the Post decided to highlight Louie, saying, here we have a claims advocate who's taking money. They said he didn't have a very good reputation in service and that when he came out, he got these benefits. And then he went on and advocated to all these other veterans that they should get benefits. What they tried to set up there was for people to look at him and see that he was a crook, see that he was a malingering ne'er-do-well in service. And as a result of that, he got out and cheated the system and then turned around and told all these other veterans to do it. They pointed out how he died. It looks like he possibly was on drugs when he died. But they didn't do any other research. They didn't look at the fact that he was 100% service connected, that one of his disabilities was a mental health condition, and that as anyone who knows who served, mental health conditions can affect you in a ton of ways, including leading to bad performance records in service, leading to debilitating drug and alcohol addictions. You see, the Post didn't want to include that because that would have muddied up their very well-researched, very thorough investigation here. I just think of Louie and all the people he affected. He had millions and millions of views on YouTube. We had a friendly competition when he first started to see who could get the most likes and whose channel could be the best because he was so charismatic. He had a way of getting information across that was really important in a way that was understandable. And for those who are in this system, for those who are in the VA and its crazy language, you know that that's not an easy thing to do. So this leads me to wonder, the Post couldn't interview Louie and get his side of the story because he's dead. But you figured they might have reached out to one of his followers, try to get their story as far as why they follow Louie, what has Combat Craig done for them? Or is their assumption is because someone watched him, they must be fraudsters too? You know, I'm a father of two boys, and one of the things that I've tried to teach my boys is to not fight, never start a fight. But in life, you sometimes end up in fights. And the one thing I've told them is always punch up. If they're in a fight and I find out about it, I want to know that there was a bully that needed to be taken down. I want to know that there was somebody in a corner and a big group was picking on somebody. and they stood up for him. Call me naive, old-fashioned, but I think of a newspaper as a guardian, not just of the truth, but of the minority. Someone that speaks up for those who are in need. Someone that speaks up for those who are overseen. Who points to the government when it's not working. So they will tell you, oh, we did point to the government not working here. We took this little piece of fraud, less than 0.0%, and look at what these veterans have done. Meanwhile, the VA itself is denying 900,000 vets a year. It's really nothing less than despicable. But, this is America. We have a freedom of press. The press can write whatever they want. But you and me, we've got a freedom of choice. And we can choose what we read and don't read. I, for one, will no longer follow the Post. Please take a look at the data that I sent you with this. As we say at Hill and Ponton every week as we gather as a community, knowledge is power. The more you know about your disability claim, the more likely you are to get the benefits you deserve. Unfortunately, the more we know about our attackers now, we need to know. And the more we know about them and the more we educate others on what a one-sided investigation this was, the more we're going to be able to show the world that, yes, you do deserve the benefits that you're entitled to. Thank you.